Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome to the second video in this tutorial series. So as you can see, we have our sword in here that's imported from Maya into ZBrush. Now, I just wanted to mention one thing, just so that way there's no secrets, is that inside of Maya here, all I did is I created a group, just grouped all of these pieces together, gave it a name, and then exported this out as an OBJ. It does not matter if it's an FBX or an OBJ, ZBrush is going to take either one of those files. So I just wanted to let you know that that is what I've gone ahead and done. Okay, so as you can see, everything looks pretty tessellated, especially the handle, everything's come in here. If I go ahead and just look at our wireframe, now notice it came in as just one piece, and that's totally fine because, this is going to be a good way to go forward. So everything has its own poly group. So we can go ahead and actually just go and do a group splits like so. Okay, so now you can see that all of these pieces that we had combined inside of Maya are all now combined in ZBrush, and they are their own poly group. So this is very, very useful for us. So at this stage, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to speed this up, but I'll just walk you through this first part here. Is I'm just going to isolate this and I'll walk you through. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit Control D a few times. Now, if you're wondering how many times you have to Control D this, my answer is going to be, not too high. Like, this doesn't need to be millions and millions because I don't think that matters too much. A lot of the times what I do when I'm smoothing it inside of ZBrush is I'm just looking for any sort of, errors or mistakes, something I might have missed. Sometimes, if you have wonky topology, ZBrush, when you import it, will do something like delete it or try to fix it. So sometimes you'll end up with gaping holes depending on what your topology was. But I think the topology is fairly clean. And I like to just basically go through and divide it up until I cannot see any sort of weird, tessellation going on in the mesh. In other words, if I were to go back a couple of steps, you can kind of see how we start to see some of these, little faces showing up. So you would want to keep going. You don't want to stop dividing when you see this. You want to keep going a little bit more. So I think probably this is fine, almost at 400,000. So I think I'm going to be okay with that. So next, let's go ahead and we'll look at our Dynamesh settings. I always just like to go ahead and do this first Dynamesh, the default 128, just to see what that gives us. Probably won't work, but you never know. So one thing before we Dynamesh, because right now you can see that everything is the same poly group, which is fine for now, but let's go ahead and create a poly group for each one of these. And the best way to do that is to go to auto groups. And it's basically going to take every group or every subtool, every mesh that's not actually combined, like welded together, and it's going to go ahead and give it its own poly group. So now we have 5 different poly groups. Okay, so now let's go ahead and take it off wireframe and let's go ahead and hit Dynamesh. But before we do, make sure this little groups button is checked. That's going to respect the poly groups. So for example, if I don't have this turned on and I hit Dynamesh and I go ahead and hit this, let's go ahead and give it a little bit more resolution now. Okay, so it actually went through and it's going to weld and, actually combine everything together. And we don't want that. So what you want is to go ahead and turn the groups on. That way, when you hit Dynamesh at the appropriate resolution, so now you can see it actually kept these meshes separate, which is what we want. We don't want to combine all of this stuff anyway. So that's totally going to be fine. So now let's go ahead and get a number that works for us. Go and turn our groups on. Let's do something like maybe even 1500. Okay, so that's not too bad. You can see we're sitting at 200,000. So that's obviously, it's still considerably low. So let's go ahead and push this a little bit further. So the number I'm looking at doesn't really matter as much as what I see, because what I see is everything looks fairly clean. It looks pretty much exactly the way it looked before we Dynameshed, and that's sort of the rule of thumb that you want to look out for is don't take your mesh and downgrade it any more than you need to. I think that's a pretty good standard rule. So don't forget, we can always Control D and divide up. So now we're sitting at about 2.4 million active points, and I think that's going to be just fine for our sake. So just kind of taking a look around at the mesh, seeing what it did to it. Honestly, I think this is going to be just fine. I don't see any errors there. So basically the way that I've set this up is, it's like I mentioned before, it's all, smoothed. So I can just divide it up. And maybe you're asking, well, if you built it to smooth, why even Dynamesh? Why not just sculpt with this level of resolution and just keep, subdividing up and down as you go? It's actually a really good point, because you could do that if that's the way that you chose to work. Typically with, this workflow, with my workflow, if you're not modeling with accuracy and you're not giving yourself even quads, that's where I would say don't do it, because you might be modeling, and let's say this area right here is really dense and you have lots of topology and you're able to sculpt all this really great detail. Then let's say you come up here and you weren't modeling with clean quads, and maybe you're up here and now you don't get that same level of detail up here that you have down here. So it's totally viable to go through and actually model with that approach in mind, but you just have to make sure that your model can support that the sculpt can support that. That's what's really important here. So typically, I would say about, I don't know, maybe 80 to 90% of the time, I'm probably using the method of Dynamesh. Very rare circumstances would have to happen for me to do a subdivision workflow. I think it's a lot more common with character artists, because you're making lots of big sweeping changes, as well as really finite changes. So, that's what I have to say on that. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to speed this up, and I'm just going to go through and basically divide everything and do exactly what we did with the sword blade itself. And I'm going to go ahead and bring everything up to the same level of detail. Everything should be Dynameshed by the time we come back. All right, so I will see you in just a little bit. All right, everyone, welcome back. So now you can see that we have gone through and basically brought everything up to the exact same level. So now you can see we're sitting at about 17.5 million points. I sort of went a little overboard with how many points I wanted, but I think my PC should be able to take it, which leads me to say that if your PC cannot take this much, don't worry. I think a lot of these pieces are probably, a little bit higher than they need to be. It's not that big of a deal. So just go as high as your computer will allow it to go. So before we actually begin doing any sculpting, the piece of advice that I want to give you, and this is something that I just kind of had to learn over time, and that was that just because you are in ZBrush does not mean that you need to sculpt every square inch of the asset, right? And that's something that I just had to learn, because, I was in here and I started to, get all these props and all these things, and I would literally go through and sculpt every single edge, every single plane. I'd put like an alpha on and start messing with it. And the truth is that, stylized assets are fairly clean. They're very simple. They're done with a really clear intention, right? So if you make a mark, that mark is there for a very specific reason, right? It's not something close to realism where you just kind of, go through and just make dings here and like, oh, maybe, the sword hit right down here and now it's got a big scratch. Like, you still can think that way, but a lot of the times with realistic stuff, it's, very, just kind of the detail is scattered everywhere. It still has intention behind it, but there's just more of it. So, that's just something that you want to think about as you're going through here is just, when you're sculpting your assets, just think like, do I really need to sculpt this, or am I just doing it because I think it looks cool? Now, there's nothing wrong with, wanting to make something look cool, but just ask yourself that, like, oh, am I going overboard with the sculpting? Like, let's look back at the concept and just really assess, right? Really assess what you're doing every step of the way, and that way you won't end up with a really dirty or like muddy sculpt, so to speak. So that's I think one of the biggest pieces of advice that I could give you as far as sculpting. All right, so let's go ahead and start looking at this and get ready to start sculpting a little bit. So before I start sculpting, let's go ahead and look at the concept here. So obviously this is a very badass looking concept here. So you can see that overall everything looks fairly clean, I think. So if you look at the blade, if I go ahead and isolate this really quick here, so you can see that we have some sort of maybe some markings here, here, here. So we have a lot of different kind of marks on the blade. I think that's going to be pretty cool to add some of that in there for sure. If you look down here, there's not necessarily a whole lot that's, technically visible. I don't see damage or anything necessarily like on the hilt right here. And that's okay. I think we can always add in a little bit of that just to add some sculpting, elements to this. Again, it's not necessary to go through and add a whole bunch of stuff that's not necessarily there. But, adding a little bit to emphasize the metal, I think is going to be okay. And adding some damage, that's always a good idea, just because it shows a little bit of history, adds a little bit of interest to the area, so that's fine. So we'll just kind of go through, each material at a time and just sort of look at it and just sort of add in our details as we go. As I mentioned before, there are some things that we need to go through and start to fix a little bit because, as you can see here, if we go ahead and just kind of look, so you see how we have like some of these lines right here, and we have, some of these kind of markings here. So we're going to want to go through and fix some of this stuff up first. So this would be considered, sort of the cleanup stage, right? So I'm not going in here with my brushes and, going through and making marks like this yet. We'll get to that. That's definitely the fun part, but we want to make sure that we clean up any sort of issues that we might come across. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So I'm going to go ahead and use the H polish brush. And let's just kind of, go through and let's tackle this one first. This should be pretty easy. So the intensity is set to default. So let's just kind of go through, just kind of lightly, just kind of brush this up a little bit. Now, one thing I should mention too is that I'm only going to be sculpting like one side probably for this entire tutorial, just because when it comes down to it, so I'm going to end up just splitting this right in half anyway when it comes time to do the actual texturing. So that's just going to save a lot of time and UV space because each side doesn't need to be unique for any reason. So just keep that in mind. So I'm just going to go through here, just start kind of like smooth things out just a little bit. You can see that some of the edges get a little bit tessellated and they get a little funny. So just kind of trying to negate that as best we can. And just kind of smoothing these edges out just a little bit. And you can see like right here, like there's some weirdness going on here. So just kind of constantly rotating the camera around, sort of taking a look at all of that. So you can see inside these like cracks in here, we want to try to smooth this out the best we can. And a good way to do that, sometimes, if you're holding shift down, that's a good way to do it. But if you don't know this, there's a sort of alternative way that the shift button works, that smoothing works. And that is if you hold shift down like you normally would smooth, and then you let go of shift while smoothing, it sort of changes the way that the brush works. And it's a really great way to sort of get some areas smoothed out that you couldn't normally. I think I discovered that when I was in school, or maybe a teacher had told me that, and I thought that was pretty life-changing for me, kind of a game changer as far as like how to smooth. So you can see, as I'm working on this, you can see it start to sort of come to life a little bit more, starting to, clean up my mistakes a bit more. So let's look kind of at this area too. Any of these sort of weird lines from smoothing, we're going to kind of just clean that up. Okay. And don't forget, as you're doing this, don't be afraid to re-dynamesh if you have to. That's totally going to be fine. Also, if you're doing this, you can just subdivide if you feel like you need more topology. I really don't have any set rules on stuff like that. So now what I will do to try to get this little line back in here is I'm going to just kind of sculpt on the other side of it and just kind of see how this flow just kind of goes like this. So I'm just going to kind of take my brush and just kind of slowly sculpt up with the flow of this and sculpt on the opposite side. And what this is going to do is push the topology inwards, and it's going to pop this little edge line out. And that's sort of what we're going for here. And to even emphasize that more, let's just grab the pinch brush. And we're just going to go through here, just kind of lightly press in. This brush isn't one of my favorites, but it does work. I'm just going to go through and just pinch this edge in a little bit. I think that should definitely help a little bit. Just add in that shape and then just kind of smooth it out. Right, so that way it looks really intentional. And you know, one thing I like to do, I do like to go on the edges and just kind of do that smoothing trick I showed you. Just because it helps to pop the bevel of the edge out a little bit more. And I think that it looks really nice. All right, so just kind of giving this a little bit more love. Now, something that I've noticed, you can see this little gap right here. We're kind of missing where this edge kind of comes through. So let's actually grab one of Orb's brushes. Let's grab like the Orb slash brush, and let's just kind of go through here. Might be a little bit too intense, so let's grab the Orb cracks, and let's just kind of go through and just kind of reconnect. Just reconnect this line here, and smoothing as we go. There we go. I'm just trying to make it look like it was, you know, all intentional. I think that's one of the biggest things to remember when you're doing stylized work, is that everything looks like it took one try. Like when you actually take a look at stylized work, it's simple and it looks like it took no effort, and that is when you succeed at making it stylized. Because realistically, it takes so many different times where I'm going over the same line, or maybe it takes me 50 different types of strokes to try to get that one perfect line. But that, people don't see that. People don't see that all of those marks that I made. All they see is the finished result. So I just lowered the intensity of my brush just a little bit, and constantly looking at it, from a different angles to see, how the light is affecting all of this. And sometimes that's what works really well. You just have a really low intensity brush, and then you just kind of constantly go back over it again, go over it again. And that kind of helps it to smooth out over time, helps you to make, better marks, I guess, if that makes sense. Because you're not worried about making a huge indent. Okay, so you can kind of see even that, like that helped a lot, just kind of going in, just kind of trying to nurse this just a little bit and just get this curve back in here. Take the pinch brush again. Actually, we could even try the Orb. I know Orb has a pinch brush. Let's try this, see if we can get any kind of different result. That's not too bad. So I do want to try to go in here, and I do want to smooth this out a little bit. You've noticed that it's, it's very tessellated, it's very thin, And I think going through and trying to smooth this out and make it the bevel just a little bit thicker is gonna look better. And it'll also help for like curvature and everything when we get into start texturing. But I think I could call this first pass done. What I like to do is I like to just kind of jump around. So as I'm working on something else, if I spot that maybe I missed something on this mesh, I'm going to end up coming back in and just kind of working on it just a bit more. Just kind of fix some of these lines here. It starts to look nice. So yeah, I think for now, I'm going to call this piece done for like that first pass. And should I decide to come back, actually, let's do this really quick. See this piece right here, this little, if I can actually mark it. So I'm referring to this piece. So this was actually a separate piece. This was a piece that I just modeled in, and then I just kind of stuck it and combined it. So notice how we have this edge. It's not quite smooth. It's just kind of tessellated along that line. So if we go through and we smooth out this transition just like this, you see how it starts to look like the piece was actually like welded there? That's what we want. Something just like that, to where it looks like it was, perfectly manufactured to fit that, and not just sort of, as my teachers used to say, like Frankenstein together. We don't want any Frankensteining. Okay, now let's just go through again with the orb cracks, and let's just kind of finesse this edge back just a little bit. I think that'll look really great. Okay. Yeah, I think that'll be good for now. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the area that I mentioned earlier. So this little sword piece up here, what we can do is let's go ahead and hit Control Shift and Alt, and we'll select this subtool, and it'll isolate it. And then we can just solo this so we can see it. Yes, so obviously very, very thin, razor thin. So one thing we could do, let's try taking the H polish again. Let's increase the intensity back. Okay, now if I start making a move, if I start holding Alt, this is going to reverse it and start pushing the topology out towards us like this. You'll notice that it starts to affect the backside. Now we certainly do not want this, because that's going to start to really destroy all of the topology that we have, or the little that we have of it. So if you've seen my other videos, you know that I love this little move here. Is if you go to brush and you go down to auto masking and we hit back face masking, this will allow it to not affect the backside and only the area that we can see. So now we'll go through with our Alt key, and let's just try to, essentially what I'm doing is just adding a little bit more thickness to this side. And I think that's gonna help it out quite a bit. So I'll just kind of keep going, and maybe we could just lightly smooth this out. We don't want to smooth too much because this is an edge, but it is starting to get a little thin, just a little too thin. It's starting to get, as you can notice, see how it's getting a little serrated. That's something that we want to try to avoid, because that will definitely probably reflect in our actual low poly when it comes time to do baking. So that is something to just keep in mind. So one thing, let's go ahead and do this actually. Let's go ahead and, instead of keeping this all one subtool, let's go ahead and split this into multiple subtools. So I'm going to go through and just do a group split. I'm going to hit OK. So now we can just sort of deal with this piece on its own. And so what I want to do, instead of dynameshing again, I'm just going to go ahead and give it one more subdivision. Okay. And so now we're sitting at 1.3 million. I think that's plenty of topology to work with. Now, if you want to fix some of this serration right here, this serrated edges, we can go through and we can try to smooth out some of this. I think that's probably going to be a safe way to go. Another way that we could go about it is taking a clip curve brush, and we could just kind of very, very subtly just kind of clip off the pieces that are just kind of hanging there. So if I do this, you'll see that now it's nice and straight. I'm a huge fan of doing something like that, but We'll do that move towards the end once we reach, sort of the end of the cleanup phase. So let's just keep going through. And my goal now, since I'm not really worried about this backside, like I mentioned, I'm just trying to smooth this out and get this looking like, it's not lumpy at all, and it looks like it was, made to look this way, I guess. So using variations of the Alt key and pushing it in as well to try to get it to smooth. And I like to back up so you can see that, my marks are getting, they're pretty noticeable now. So let's just keep working at it. We might need to just decrease our intensity just a little bit more. Just kind of go through here and just holding the Alt key, pushing that topology back out. So you can see we're starting to make a little bit of a dent. So I think this is starting to work for us just a little bit. Another brush that you could use is the flatten brush. And we can go ahead and let's see if the intensity will work. This is going to be a little bit stronger than the H polish brush, which I think we kind of need right now. Again, just kind of going over it, and we might need to do the back face masking for this because it's starting to eat away at this side. So I'm just going to back up just a little bit. Okay, now we have the back face mask on, so now we can start to tackle this again. Okay, now I'm just going to smooth the entire area over again. Maybe we'll take H polish and go up on the top here and go against where this edge is and just try to help to sharpen that back up. Again, we can take the pinch brush, see if we can pinch the edge together. So you can see it's just a combination of doing a few different things to try to clean something like this up. And I'm just going to go through here and just kind of smooth out our edges again. And we're kind of losing the edge right here. You see how it's just kind of fading away. Let's see if maybe we could change that. We could just kind of take our H polish brush on the sides here and just kind of work those edges in just a bit more. Being very subtle about it and checking constantly. We can take our pinch brush and just kind of lightly go in. Okay, and then once more, take our H polish and just kind of polish this out. Okay, so I think that's enough finessing with this piece for now. I think that I did what I wanted to do. So this side looks a lot more happy than it used to. And of course, we don't care about this side. So all in all, not too bad. All right, so let's take a look at a fun piece here. Let's go ahead and take a look at this piece. Now, just like you saw before, these pieces, they are now fully combined, but they look like they are just kind of still stuck in there. They don't look like they were, manufactured out of the same exact mold or something like that. So what we can do is we can just kind of go through and begin to smooth some of this stuff out a bit. And I don't really care too much if my symmetry is turned on for this. Actually, I really don't care at all. So let's just kind of go through here, and I'm just going to smooth all this out. I'm actually going to lower my resolution a little bit. I think that it's probably a little bit too high. The lower the resolution you have, the easier it is to make changes like this. Okay, so that ended up looking pretty good overall. You know, honestly, my advice is just do not be afraid to make bigger bevels, because we know when it comes to stylized stuff, you want people to be able to see all of the work that you did. You want all the shapes to be bold and punchy, and a little bit of an exaggeration of reality, right? That's kind of what stylized is. And you know that this piece is relatively small, but now, you know, all of the light's going to be able to reflect off those bevels, and it makes it you know, a little bit more appealing too. When you have something that is just like razor sharp, it's a little threatening. And you know, I kind of see this sword as being, you know, maybe more of like a sword that you know, the good guy would use, right? Or the hero. So, you know, that's kind of what I'm thinking about as well, doing that. So just keep that in mind as far as, you know, getting the bevels down. That's something just to think about. So I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same method for this piece that we just did. So, I mean, you can see just how quickly this just gets brought into more of a stylized realm, just because we have smoother transitions, we have a little bit bigger bevels. Overall, it's just way more appealing, in my opinion, to look at. All right, so let's take a look at this beast right down here. So this was definitely a piece that I kind of really didn't care too much about, to be honest. Like, you know, you can see all the modeling mistakes. We have edges everywhere. And so let's just go ahead and get those cleaned up by using the same tools we've been using, like the H polish brush. And we'll just go through and just start to, basically you want to sculpt against. So you see how this line right here is going down? So you want to sculpt across the line. This is going to help smooth that out more. So anywhere that I'm kind of seeing some weird, you know, shadowing going on, that's where I'm going to direct my attention to. And then, you know, of course, once you've made your marks on here and it starts to go away, let's go ahead and take our smooth, and we'll just kind of do a pass over that and just kind of smooth out all of those marks we just made. And again, let's go ahead and maybe we could drop our intensity down to something like 10. Then we can really just kind of finesse all of that, you know, those weird shapes that were modeled in. So this is what I'm talking about. Like, it's okay to model, you know, this way, as long as you have the means and the ability to, you know, come into ZBrush and to just kind of fix it, right? Just kind of have a light hand, just fix all of those mistakes. Right, so that's starting to look pretty clean. And again, I'm not really concerned with the backside pretty much for almost any of this, because we'll just go through and we'll be deleting that half. All right, so now you can see we have this little indent right here. So we're just gonna hold Alt and just kind of fill in that gap, just kind of smooth out all of this right now. So, I mean, you can see just how quickly that was. That was just, you know, the gap is pretty much gone at this point. And we can just kind of, you know, start to sculpt right close to where these edges are. Maybe we could crisp them up just a little bit. So yeah, I kind of clean that side up nicely. Let's go ahead and do the same for this side. There we go. So I think that's looking a lot better than before. Looking nice and clean and tidy. So let's take a look at the top. I don't think there's really too much we need to do on the top here. We can just kind of crisp this up just a bit more. And then we can just kind of smooth that out just a little bit. So as far as the leather straps for the handle are concerned, I don't think there's a whole lot I want to do to them right now. I think for the most part, they're pretty good in terms of where I want them for this stage. But there is a little tiny gap you can see, and that just happened from smoothing. So not a big deal. So what I want to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and just split these pieces up into their own subtools, because we're going to need to work on them individually. So let's just go ahead and we'll do a group split. So now you can see that they're all in their own subtool, which is fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and take the move brush, and I'm just going to lightly just, you know, pull this down just a bit. Same with on this side. All right, excellent. Now just kind of doing a quick look around, making sure that everything else looks good, which it does. Okay, let's go ahead and just take a look at this piece here. So I'm going to do the exact same thing. You can see that we're getting a little bit of like artifacting going on here, so that's okay. We're just going to smooth this out, kind of get rid of that. Same with down here, you see all this kind of artifacting. We're just going to go through and smooth it. Anywhere you see that. Okay, and then let's just kind of go through with our H polish again. And what I like to do is I kind of see that there's like, go ahead and if I can illustrate this again. So the curvature, the way that this is moving, I kind of see this moving where it goes and it kind of like dips in right here. There's like a little bit of a dip. And then if we go along here, it kind of raises up just a bit. So if you can take your H polish brush across the entire thing, I'm going to hold Alt right here and kind of get rid of that dip. And you may not notice it as much as I do. It's something that I can just kind of catch because the light's just hitting it a certain way. Let's go ahead and bring the intensity back up a bit more and just kind of go over this just a bit. And then you can always do the reverse and kind of smooth that back out. We're just trying to get a nice, like, smooth sort of, you know, transition with this this edge. Okay. And then we'll fix this. See how this little bevel goes, you know, it's this certain length, and then as soon as we get here, it gets a little bit bigger. So we can go through and just kind of help that a bit more just by, you know, sculpting it with the H polish brush. Okay. So again, it's not a whole lot of cleanup work. It's just kind of, you know, tidying up loose ends. And I don't think I want to use the pinch brush necessarily down here. I think it might pull the geometry too much for me. So I'm going to kind of steer away from that if I can. And let's just kind of go through. And we'll do our smoothing pass over everything, Just kind of really brighten up those edges. I think, let's go ahead and maybe we can try the pinch brush down here just a bit. Because we're starting to lose this edge. So just kind of go in pretty hard with that one. Maybe we can just kind of go back through and flatten this area out. And honestly, I think I might call that okay. Might have to come back maybe a second pass and we can just kind of clean that up a bit more. Let's see where this is. And yeah, honestly, I'm okay with that. I think that's you know, it's such a small little area down there, so I think we can go ahead and just call that good. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of do a sweep really quick and just kind of look overall at the mesh and see if there's anything else we can add. I do see like a little discrepancy right here, so maybe we could fix this up. You see how it just kind of ends awkwardly right here, so maybe we'll take the orb cracks and we'll decrease the intensity, and maybe we could just make like a subtle line that just kind of like continues. Let's see if that helps, and we'll just use our H polish and just kind of clean this up a bit. Maybe we need to drop the intensity. Even if we have to like smooth it out so it's not that noticeable, like what we've just done, I think is already, you know, way better than what was before, just by smoothing it out just a bit more. Let's go through and just kind of smooth these bevels out. I love smooth bevels, love them. Gotta have them. Might be able to go through here. These bevels down here are quite sharp, so we'll just get those a little bit softer. I think what we could do is go ahead and just take these little tiny, I don't know what these are really. They might be like little crystals, basically, like in the sword. These little guys right here. So again, you know, this is where we're going to show a little bit of restraint, because we don't need to sculpt on these necessarily. You certainly could if you wanted to make this more like a diamond sort of thing, where you have all these, you know, cuts. I can show you what I mean by that, but just actually we could do this and just sort of kind of just go through something like this, right, where it starts to shape up to be kind of more like a diamond. I think that could look cool. We'll see. I don't mind something like this, but I don't want to steer too far from the concept. So for now, let's just go through and we'll just kind of smooth out these pieces here. And we're only going to need one overall, so it doesn't really matter too much if this one is, you know, necessarily smoothed out, but if we want to take some cool screenshots of the sword, of the sculpt, you know, that's where it's okay to, you know, do both sides. Okay, and let's just kind of look at this piece right here. All right, not too bad. I think the thing that bothers me, you see how it just kind of terminates right here? It just creates a weird shape. It creates something that to me is a little distracting. I don't know if it bothers or if it would bother anyone else, but it definitely bothers me. So I think what we could do is we'll turn on our symmetry. And if we come up here to our transform, let's see if we can do. Okay, so now that we have our symmetry turned on, now we can kind of work on both sides at once. So what I want to do is just sort of take our move brush and just kind of slightly just start to move this in to where we don't have that weird shape sticking out. So you see how much better that is? That just sort of, you know, it looks way better than having a sort of like weird, line right there. So same with this. You see how it just sort of creates this little swoosh right here. We don't really want that, so let's just kind of, maybe we could pull this edge out a bit more. There we go. So we didn't even change the shape too much. We could actually go through here and just kind of push this back in. Maybe we could take that H polish brush and then just kind of smooth some of this out. Like so. Right, little things like that. They don't take a lot of time to fix, but it adds a tremendous amount. So just think about stuff like that. One thing I forgot to mention, if you look in the concept here at this big kind of jewel in the centerfold, so a lot of the times, I see a lot of this in concepts where you'll see jewels kind of, pushed into things, and which is cool. I actually like that a lot. But you'll notice that, it's not attached on any which way. And I think, when you start looking at that and start looking at jewelry, you'll see that, you have these sort of like buckets that the jewelry is held into. So I ended up just modeling this really quickly. I'll kind of show you this. And this is just sort of like the bucket that the jewel is held into, and it's going to have that same kind of rose gold, finish on it. That way it just kind of adds to the believability, so we don't just have a floating gemstone right here, and this will actually look like it's intentionally done, and it's like connected, to the sword with a very intentional way. Same with, you can see these like little stones on the side here. You see how we have this little tiny like acorn shaped bucket. I believe that's what they're called, but that's basically going to be the same thing that we have here on this side. Just sort of holds the crystals or the gems in there. Okay, so let's just kind of look at this as a whole now. I think we've gone through and done, the majority of the cleanup work that we needed to. We didn't have to spend too much time, which is great. And that just kind of shows you, how quickly you can just adjust mistakes that you might have made in Maya. But that, for me, like that gave me the confidence to model as quickly as I wanted to. And, I'm still thinking about what I'm doing, but I know that I can come into ZBrush and I can fix all those mistakes, and it's not going to take too much time. So, but yeah, overall, I'm quite happy with this. I think that this turned out, pretty well. I'm not seeing a lot of like major issues off the top of my head, and that's the beauty of it, because at this stage, let's go ahead. What we could do is for each of these pieces, you can go through and you can open up the morph target, and you can store a morph target, or you can use the layers. And that's just going to store the mesh basically like at its base, right, before we do any sculpted work. So that way, if you ever need to, you can always just reference that and come back later. You'll see me probably use this a couple of times as we go through. But for now, I think that this is in a perfect position to go ahead and begin the sculpting. So I will see you in the next video.